All right, now thank you so much for staying with us here on The Bottom Line, KE. We want to get into our conversation tonight. But before we do that, let me just take you through some of the facts and figures that will be forming the basis of our conversation. First is actually the budget process timelines, because this is what is making headlines today. Now, on August 30th, CS Treasury gives a circular advising all government agencies on how to prepare their budget request for the next financial year. When it comes to September, the National Assembly submits the budget review and outlook paper to the Cabinet for approval. On October 21st, the budget review outlook paper is tabled in the National Assembly. Why am I telling you this? Because I want us to understand where we are at the moment, what exactly is happening and what is expected. Well, on January, Treasury takes the budget policy statement through public participation before seeking cabinet approval. February 1st, the Commission on Revenue Allocation submits its recommendations for how much should be distributed to each level of government, and that is the national and the counties. This is what then informs the division of revenue and county allocation of revenue bills tabled annually in Parliament by February 15th. Now, on February 15th, CS National Treasury tables the budget policy statement in Parliament. This we have already seen happen, and Treasury also submits to Parliament the debt management strategy. April 30th, national budget estimates are tabled in Parliament. Now, the finance bill, which set out the revenue-raising measures for government, should also be tabled at this particular time. That's when that happened. In May, what is supposed to happen? Well, the National Assembly begins public hearing on the budget estimates. Last month, this is exactly what was happening. And right now, we are in June. Now, this year's statement is set to be read in Parliament on June 15th. On Thursday, we expect the debate of this particular bill to start. And by the time we get to the end of the month, that is the end of the financial year. All right? So some of the things that are very interesting, this is a budget that is 3.6 trillion. This is the ambitious budget of this particular government. It is 3.6 trillion. Some of the things that they've actually proposed, I just want to touch on a few, not all of them, that have elicited quite a debate in the country. We start with the personal income tax, where the personal income tax bracket has seen two newly proposed changes to it. One is a 35% tax rate levied for income above $500,000, and house levy of 3%, that is from the employer and the employee, in order to finance the affordable housing projects. Now, why are people so opposed to this? We'll be getting to the details of that. Something else is the value-added tax. Now, the bill proposes the following on VAT: increase the tax rate from 8% to 16% on petroleum products. What will be the implication? Well, I say this will result in an increase in the cost of fuel, with the resulting increase in the cost of products and the cost of living, right? So, right now, the public participation process is done. We expect this bill to be tabled in Parliament on Thursday. We'll also be getting the details of what is expected next from our able panelists here on set. Another interesting fact on this particular issue is that 74 out of 84 interest groups have opposed the Finance Bill 2023. But the executive is eager to make it pass the way it is. Welcome to the program tonight. This is The Bottom Line. My name, as always, is Brian Amwai, and we do want you to engage us on our socials at Amwai Brian on Twitter, at Lookuptv. The hashtag we are using is The Bottom Line KE. Send your feedback on Facebook, and we'll be able to sample some of it as we continue with the program tonight. I want to introduce my guests. Now, I have Kevin Osido, who is the Executive Director, County Governors Watch. Thank you so much, Kevin, for making time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I know Kevin is not new here. You've seen him on our screens quite a number of times. And I also have Asha Bashir, who is the Deputy Secretary General in our Kenya Party. Thank you.
Welcome.
This is the first time I'm hosting you.
Yes.
It is an honor.
Thank you, sir.
We should toast to that, right?
We should do a toast.
But you have an empty table. So.
I know, we should do better next time. Sorry. Before we get into this conversation, there is a clip that I want us to hear. I don't know if my director is ready with that, so that we actually get to form the basis of this conversation tonight. Is it ready?
mwenye anaenda kupiga kura ati kupinga mpango ya serikali kuwapatia hawa vijana ambao waliwapigia kura ati ajira. I am waiting for the members of parliament who will go and vote against the plan to give these young people, majority of them, they are voters. I am waiting for members of parliament to go and vote against housing that would give these people a chance to own a decent home.
Unajua ni mzuri nikuambia, hata kama utapinga hiyo bill, itapita. You don't have the numbers. So, iko haja gani kupinga kitu ambaye itapita? There's no need. But you must also be truthful to the people. That if you don't collect taxes, there will be no development. That is the truth.
I want to start with you, Kevin. How bad is this situation that this bill has to go the way it is, despite such a huge opposition? 74 out of 84 saying no. We just have about 10 groups actually supporting this particular bill. How bad is it for the government that they have to have this through?
I don't think it is that bad.
Okay.
And I believe that the sentiments by His Excellency the President and his deputy are largely misplaced. They are highly political as opposed to being technical, and probably because they are politicians and not technicians on the budget process. And maybe to them it is something that has to pass for a number of reasons. One is that it is their first budget. Of course, to President William Ruto, it is not the first, because he's been deputy president for 10 years, 2 terms, 2 5-year terms. But I think that probably has given him some insight on some of the issues that Kenya needs to deal with, and probably that's partly why he's of the opinion that the finance bill has to pass as it is. And some of those could be, one, the debt burden of this country, and I think we've heard him talking severally about measures that need to be taken for us to be able to cure the debt issues. I hold a totally different opinion, that you must not tax people to pay debts. If the monies were stolen, because it's not possible, Brian, that as a former President Uhuru Kenyatta told us, we lose 2 billion shillings per day. Where is that money? Where has it gone to? If you do 2 billion shillings in a month or in a year, 365 days in a year is over 700. And
I saw someone argue and say, this is the thing. When we continue with this conversation of paying taxes, Kenyans need to understand where exactly is my money going.
Exactly.
Because if you seal those loopholes of what you call corruption, then the money that you're looking for in terms of taxes, you're actually going to get it.
Precisely.
Let me come to you, Asha. What do you make of those statements coming from the executive first?
Thank you very much, Brian. It is actually quite painful to hear that the highest office bearers would come out as a politician. We understand, but at the same time, it's sort of a blackmail, because remember, the members of parliament are there courtesy of the third arm of the government, which is the legislature. With the doctrine of separation of powers, it means the parliament has a role, and they derive their mandate from the people who elected them. In any democracy, I might disagree with you, Brian. That does not mean you will punish the people I represent by saying, I'm not going to do this or this and this because you voted that way. You've been given the mandate by the people. And I'm assuming that in any democracy, people will vote depending on what they feel the bill will present to their people back at home. By virtue that as a member of parliament, you have the mandate of your people who elected you to parliament. Therefore, for me, it is sort of the executive overstretching and wanting to ensure there's no doctrine of separation of powers, because the whole essence of having a parliament is for checks and balances, so that they supervise what the executive is doing. So the minute we go into more of a blackmail than having a national conversation on what can be done, then we are starting from a wrong footing. Because then it means parliament is under siege.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask. Is parliament under siege at this particular point?
Yes and no. Yes, because if you look at the way politics is done in this country, the president knows the people that he's talking to. And he knows probably how each and every one of those members got into parliament. As much as, of course, the constitution gives sovereign power to the citizens. but we know how politics inapangwa katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. So the president is aware about maybe the monies that he gave to MPs to go and campaign. He probably knows people that were given direct tickets for nominations, and he's probably just doing a carrots and sticks, you know, or he's taking that opportunity for a carrot and stick game. He says, I gave you this, you must give me this. But of course, the no bit of it is purely what she's talked about, the doctrine of separation of powers, that you have an arm of government, you have three arms, you have a government with three arms. And each of those arms exercise their roles and responsibilities independently, but largely interdependently. So interdependently because the executive needs parliament to pass laws that will support its aspirations and its engagement processes, its development agenda and services that are supposed to be delivered, policies and all that. The judiciary is also expected to adjudicate over matters that are of either conflict, disputes, and among other several things, which also relate to the roles and functions that the executive actually is implementing, because the executive is the implementing arm. So coming and talking down people with the assumption that because I know you and I know where I can be able to fix you, I think the president forgets that these are now people who've already been sworn into office and they are exercising their presence in parliament by virtue of the sovereign power of the people, which can either be exercised directly or indirectly. So anyone in Kenya can be elected. You just need to run for office as espoused in the constitution. You meet the requirements and you get there. Once you are in parliament, the three arms of government are expected to engage interdependently but also exercising their power dependently. So parliamentarians will have a choice, and I'm happy about some of the processes that are going on, particularly with the budget committee and some of the discomforts that, like today the PS Hinga was meeting budget committee and they were asking him very difficult questions until the PS had to admit that indeed on this, an example of housing levy, we still have laws that we need to pass. They will have to depend on parliament to pass those laws because the executive can't pass laws and also implement while exercising oversight by itself.
All right. So, because you said yes and no, do they stand a chance of voting differently? Because we do understand the executive does have a majority when it comes to the National Assembly.
Yes.
When the president stands up and says, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to sit down and I'll be watching exactly where you put your vote, then they seem to have been put to a corner. This is exactly how I want you to vote.
Precisely.
What will happen if they do not go per the whatever the executive is actually subscribing to?
If they don't go as per what the executive is subscribing to, it means that the finance bill collapses. So the president doesn't have to assent to it by 1st of July 2023 as a law, because you took us through very good timelines of the budget, and we expect that by end of June this needs to come into law. So what will be required is that the president, based on the reservations by members of parliament, particularly the National Assembly, the speaker will write back to president and say that the finance committee brought us a report, we have debated on the bill, and these are some of the reservations that members have, so we give it back to you to engage with your cabinet secretary and give us new mechanisms. Now remember that there is a lot of whipping that is also going on, particularly from the members of parliament of Kenya Kwanza, including the fact that they already held a parliamentary group meeting at State House, and part of that was largely to whip them to vote for this law. But Brian, remember also that as this is happening, parliamentarians have been on recess. They only resumed today, and they've been listening to comments by their voters, their citizens, and the people who actually they're exercising all these responsibilities on behalf of. So failure to listen to their residents or their voters, it means that come the next voting session, they'll be asking them, we sent you there, but you chose to do your own things. Unfortunately, we will not vote you back. So it's a mixture of so many things. Yeah. But lastly, it also depends on the approach of the voting that will take place, because the bill is such a huge document. I think it's over 238 plus pages. If the speaker and the clerk choose, and of course guided by the budget committee, that they vote on clauses, that will give them a better opportunity, so that we get to know which parliamentarian voted on what clause. Is it the clause that favors the citizens, or is it a clause that doesn't favor? If they do an omnibus vote, like they do a one-round vote for the bill, then we'll of course be vilifying all parliamentarians for having voted for something which citizens don't think is right for them. Okay, it puts them in a very difficult position, and I remember just this conversation happening on Twitter, and people saying, you see,
it is you, as right now, being a member of parliament is very hard because you have, especially on the Kenya Kwanza side, you listen to the executive, and this is your president, somebody that the party leader, who wants to push his agenda in parliament and also have a bill that is going to make him work, have funds that are going to be to help him run government. And at the end of the day, you also have the people that are saying, we do not want to be taxed more. These are the things we want to be changed. Where do you draw the line? This is also something that I just want as you answer that, because we've had public participation and it has been happening for close to a month. Right now, was it a hoax, that public participation? Is it because if you say, if the deputy president says and stands up and say that bill is going to pass whether you oppose it or not, then what is the use of public participation?
It's quite unfortunate. Like I said, it's coming from a very high office. Parliamentarians right now are bound to abide by the law, because it's the law that is the ground norm. It is the benchmark. All of us here, regardless of whether you are the head of state or you are common mwananchi down in the village, we are all bound by the provisions of the law. We promulgated a constitution 2010, which was the bedrock of all these other mother laws that come, acts and parliaments, even bills and policies. When you look at the current document, there is gross violation on fundamental rights, gross violation on the constitutions and specific articles. So with that aspect itself, the reason why, like I said, a person in the high office, a caliber of a deputy president would say a bill will pass is more political, because they know they have marshaled their numbers, they have a higher number in parliament, plus if you add the MPs that we were told crossed the aisle and crossed the Rubicon to join the government aisle, so they know that we have the numbers. That is the assumption. So for them, I think the public participation was more of a mere practical exercise that we are now abiding by the law. But when you look at it, I believe that parliamentarians, wherever they are, should respect the rule of law. Because the minute as a country we degenerate from what the law says, okay, what are the provisions of the law? What does this bill, what provisions does it affect other than the constitution and other acts of parliament? Because if we bring that narrative, then each successive government that comes into place will play with the mother document that is supposed to bind us. So does it mean any other head of state that comes in will come up with a very funny document and present it? It is no wonder that this bill has attracted, unlike other bills previously, a lot of public participation, a lot of public uproar, because Kenyans now know where it hurts most. You're not dealing with people who are no longer literate, because the bill touches on almost every aspect of every part of any economy, whether you go to the agricultural sector, whether you go to industrialization, whether you come even to digital aspect, even housing. But this again, when you look back, affects the constitution. And by affecting the constitution, you affect the enabling provisions of different acts of parliament. So what will we be doing? Even if this bill passes, we expect a lot of lobby groups, a lot of Kenyans who are desirous to build this country and protect the rule of law, to go to court. Like my colleague said here, there are three arms of government. So if parliament fails, because sovereignty lies with the people, you know, according to the constitution, then it means Kenyans will resort to the last arm of government to do the interpretation bit, because the judiciary is there to enforce what the law says. So we are in a dicey situation whereby the government is so sure it will pass because they're marshalling on their numbers they have. But then there's also this other side that says, hey, wait a minute, even if you pass here, but we have another recourse, which is in the courts of law. Yeah.
It sounds good. It sounds good that it sounds good that you actually can go to court and present that. But at the end of the day, we know how judiciary actually, operates in this country to some extent. You go to seek justice, and I know Kiom Tata has moved to court, and he says he's being supported by even members of parliament from the Kenya Kwanza side, actually supporting him and say, okay, you go with this one. You're actually supporting. We do not want it. That's the thing. That's actually his also. He was actually doing an interview with NTV yesterday night. But if this matter in court, it has been tabled as urgent, but it's still going to be debated. Is there a delinking on this particular issue? Because what if the courts take forever? What happens?
The courts will not take forever, and that's why the matter has been certified as urgent. And remember that again, as we began this interesting discussion, you took us through the budget lines. So the judiciary and the judicial officers that will be adjudicating over this matter are aware about those timelines, and they also are aware that the government needs money to run its show, to do its development, current issues, pay salaries, and construct roads and water, and pay school salaries for teachers and all that. So basically government has to run. And the reason why all those are put in place is to be able to give, as we said, all the three arms of government their roles to play. And you notice that the president is tough talking to parliamentarians and not to judiciary. Of course, when he was in Busia, where Senator Okiya Omtata also made the threat, which is now a real threat to go to court, he was like, ngeni na huyu senator wenu na mumuombe so that he doesn't take me to court. Because he knows that the courts have a lot of power. And our courts have been tried, tested, and proven to actually deliver. And we've seen that from Supreme Court processes of the presidential petitions. We have seen high courts. We have seen very progressive work that has been done by our courts. Now, the courts also know that it is the last resort for any aggrieved party in this particular process. So they are not going to sit there and imagine that we also need to be paid, or we don't have to be paid. So depending on how we do the courts, the cases and all that. They have, for instance, the judicial services, the Judiciary Act. They also have related laws that govern how they navigate around their issues. And for any actions that are taken to court, and like they take time, as you are saying, there are processes of recall, so that, for instance, you can go to the Supreme Court and seek for an appeal, rather the Court of Appeal, and seek for an appeal process. And so there are a number of processes that any aggrieved party that has opinion that my case is taking long can be able to go through. But I think the bottom line is the budget lines. That
the bottom line is the budget
Yes,
lines.
exactly. The bottom line is the budget line, that the budget timelines are very clear. And they're not just things that we talk about. They're actually enshrined in law, what is called the Public Finance Management Act. The Constitution is very clear around what needs to be done when we are doing appropriation by Parliament and all these processes. So and so basically what it means is that people are also scared of their discomforts. And that's why I also think that Senator Okiya Omtata is saying that actually part of the sponsors, the supporters of my sponsors of my bill, are members of Kenya Kwanza. And you can see even from some of the narratives that they are spewing in rallies. I have already referred to the interview with the PS for Housing, PS Hinga, Charles Hinga. So people are beginning to see that it's not what it is, and it doesn't have to be what it is. Allow us to have opportunities for amendments, and if that fails at that level, then we're actually going to go to court.
Okay.
Yeah. And let me just say that the court can also put an injunction, and that is why partly this process is being certified as urgent, so that before June 30th, this matter is clearly dealt with, before even the Finance Committee submits its final report to the President for the assent, so that the President is also alive through the Attorney General to the issues around the national discomfort and what people are saying, so that when he's preparing his addendum, then he is able to consider some of the issues that are matters of discomfort to his people.
But Kevin, because it's a conversation, and we do believe that the president does follow this conversation line.
Sure.
And just watching different people having different opinions on TV in regards to this, the opposition of it is just just like you put it, it has been opposed widely. Yeah. And I remember listening to one member of parliament actually say, of all the bills he's seen, this one has been received so much opposition. So he was wondering why. And going through it is just like, okay, the people are valid to actually get to oppose it.
The thinking was not properly done.
Okay.
Needless to say, it is, I've gone through it, even from a very mere common perspective. I think a lot of it is shoddy work. The people who are working on this process did not give deep thought to the current political economy analysis of rather context of our country, and issues around debt burden, taxation, because what they are seeking to do is to widen the tax base. And I'm happy about the fact that they've gone through the numbers so that when they say that we are going to tax hair and nails and all these things, they know the number of salons that are opening up every day. They know the number of people who are visiting those salons, and there is a reason why people with graduates and people with doctorates are opening salons.
Okay.
When they talk about wines and spirits and that they are increasing tax for alcohol, beers and all these things, the government knows the data and the statistics. So that is purely what the kind of game that they are trying to play with Kenyans.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Let me come to you, Asha. This opposition, how it is being received or treated, what does that, how do you view that in terms of, you see, there's the opposition side. We've seen today people actually took to the streets to actually oppose the finance bill. They were tear gassed. Police said, you have to stop on this particular issue. This opposition of this particular finance bill, when you see that talks from the executive and the government side, the way it is being treated, what do you make of that first?
For me, like I said, it's the rule of law. Because when I look at the bill, and I've gone through each and every aspect of the bill basically, like I said, violates all acts in place currently. So does that mean that if we are sent this bill, then we go amending each and every? When you look at the way it started from the housing levy, coming to withholding tax, coming to even issue of if I go to a tax appeal tribunal and I'm going to appeal 20%. And you say I have to give you 20%. So the bill was not carefully thought about, because when you're preparing a bill, you're not supposed to infringe on the rights of Kenyans. You're not supposed to infringe on the constitution. You're not supposed to violate like I said, the constitution is the ground norm. It's the mother. So the minute you start tampering with each aspect, because when you look at it in totality, it affects all aspects of the Bill of Rights. You cannot dictate to me in terms of from Article 40 about property rights on where I should own a property. Again, when you look at it again, it infringes on the Employment Act, because the Employment Act clearly stipulates that the employer cannot deduct more than 2/3. How do you know what I have in terms of loans and other, aspects in it? So the minute you start deducting, remember again, still the Employment Act talks about, the employer giving accommodation. So what happens to that? When you say you're going to do the housing allowance, so because the Act clearly says in Article 19, Section 19, either you give me a house or you give me the house allowance.
Okay.
So what happens to that? And then the second question, aspects of discrimination come out. Like I said, the bill has violated each and every aspect.
So those are some of the things that they did not pay attention to.
They did not pay attention, because when you give this document and you tell me, if my brother here is on a pay slip, he will pay these taxes. What happens to those who do not have menial jobs? Okay. Where does that leave this bracket of people?
All right.
Then, when you also tax each and every aspect of the economy, this is a taxpayer who has not received any increase in their salary. You come and give me withholding, you give me, housing levy. So by the time this payslip is given to me, I cannot do anything with that. So what does it do on a ripple effect? So that's a question I asked, and Kenyans should contemplate that. Are we going to be going back to the dark days, even after promulgating a constitution that should act as a threshold to stop such interferences from any arm of the government?
Well, maybe, most of the time we see things that happen in government is just for public relations, PR. So maybe our constitution is supposed to be serving as PR, but no, God forbid that.
The constitution has been tried and tested again, and
Yes.
we have had very successful litigations,
Yes.
and successful judgments by our courts on areas that violate the constitution, and there are so many of them,
including the public review board procurement, because initially there was a percentage you were supposed to do for you to review the courts actually said it's an illegality. So I agree with my brother. It's not about the constitution not being the best document. It's not a PR. If there's a document that has gone through serious protection from the Kenyan people, I think it is the 2010 constitution.
Okay. All right, let me come to, because I'm also running out of time on this particular debate. When we do not get to collect, we go to Parliament, then we are taken back to the drawing board. What happens, because we'll be coming to the end of the financial year, then it needs to have a budget that is running. What happens then?
Yeah, so what happens is basically that the Parliament, National Assembly does a supplementary budget on the previous budget, because this is going to be Kenya Kwanza. It's such a mouthful, yeah? I know. Kenya Kwanza's budget. And so government has to run its businesses, and there are provisions through the Constitution, again, Public Finance Management Act and other related acts or legislations that therefore guide and protect how government will be able to get monies through appropriations by Parliament. And of course, part of what needs to happen is a robust conversation, including the levels at which we bring in the Auditor General, the controller of budget, so that ministries and government departments and agencies don't just come up with, with budgets without necessarily indicating how those budgets are going to ensure that issues around revenue generation are also taken care of. And remember that the president went to KRA and he was speaking to the officials at KRA. It's purely because Brian, KRA has failed to meet its targets, and this is happening year in, year out. They have very high targets. We have now a budget of, I think, 3.6 trillion coming from 2.9 or 3 trillion in the previous budget, and these are targets that KRA is the one that is putting in, putting down in black and white. So there has to be a very strategic conversation around government's mitigative measures on how to ensure that such a mess does not happen again. Because in the event that Parliament takes back this process, and again going back to the budget timelines that you read, Parliament and parliamentarians and other stakeholders are very aware about those budget lines. So failure to ensure that they meet those budget lines will take them back to supplementary budgets, of which the deputy president keeps reminding us that the government is broke. They inherited zero coffers. So that, I'm sure, is also one of the issues that they're alive to. But I think revenue generation is a concern that has to be put to the table, so that anything that government wants to do has to border on how it wants to ensure that it boosts money that is going to be brought to the coffers, other than overtaxing an already overtaxed Kenyan citizen.
All right, as we wind up on this conversation, and before I get your final remarks, you see, the Kenya Kwanza side is actually highlighting quite trying to, convince people to get on board with this particular finance bill. They say sugar tax exemption on the transportation of sugar from farm to factory will reduce the cost of producing sugar, and hence reduce the cost of sugar itself. Something else that I've seen here is trying to highlight protection of local fishing industry. The importation of excise duty on imported fish will give the local fishing industry an edge, as it will make imported fish expensive, ensuring growth of our blue economy. Is there anything good about this particular bill that you can say, well, okay, no, on this one, they got it right?
Other than perhaps what I can say, the intention at the start perhaps was clear to them, that as a country we should have to generate revenue for us to continue running this country. However, I think where they got lost is how to implement that. It might be a very good document, but if you have 100 out of the 100, you have 90% which affects the rule of law, like I said, it waters down the whole thing. So like the one for fishing, you're saying it's good idea that you import, but what are we talking? How are we going to empower these local fishermen? Because, okay, you've added tax on imported fish, but what happens to these local fishermen who do not have the expertise, who don't have, do it, perhaps just go to Lake Victoria and pick 200 or 300 that cannot be able to sustain the country? So what are we going to do to improve also our revenue, but at the same time ensure that our people also are making that aspect of enjoying what they do, their daily livelihood, whether it is farming, whether it is fishing, or whether it's even a white-collar job, you see? So for me, it's not about the document in entirety, it's more of, was the law and procedure followed?
Okay.
Or is it just barely, we need to collect taxes and therefore we will infringe on everybody's right and we will get there?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the question people are asking, at what expense? How far are you willing to go with this particular bill to make sure that it actually gets to pass? What process did you use to actually get to, this final document? Let me have your final remarks, and this one I'd like to start with you. What is the bottom line when it comes to this conversation?
The bottom line is that we have to ensure that government delivers, but in so doing, I don't believe that we have to overtax Kenyans. The intention, as Ashley says, is very good. because government is looking at how to be able to expand the tax base, and very good proposals, but I think there was not so proper thought around how to go about some of these issues. And I'm sure that part of the 84 petitions or proposals that they received, as the Budget Committee MP for Molo rightfully said, they've received very many good recommendations. Okay. I'm hoping that the committee will be able to put those things properly in writing and deliver a proper report, and that Kenyans, we must continue to be as robust to engage with the government processes to the level of informing our government without necessarily assuming that they know everything. Because the kind of product that they have now given us, I think, speaks largely about misses other than hits. Exactly.
Oh, okay. The bottom line.
Mine is just to reiterate that yes, the thought process was to increase the tax base, as my brother has said, to be able to make this country sustainable, for us to be able to handle our internal affairs as well as the loans and external commitments that the country owes. However, like I said, for me, it is working within the confines of the law. Because when we do that, then we are able to think outside the box. If we need to increase the tax base, but must we violate the rights of Kenyans? How can we navigate this to be able to achieve a win-win situation whereby we increase our tax base and ensure we do a lot of revenue collection, but without interfering with the rights and the processes that are stipulated in the Constitution, because it's a dicey balance. So for me, it is just to request, and I'm very happy because Kenyans are informed. People now know what is happening. It's not like before that people didn't know a bill passes and everything is gone and then you realize much later. Kenyans are quite informed, quite hardworking, quite in touch with what is happening. Therefore, I think the government should try and balance this. As much as we want to raise our revenue so that we get to where we want to be as a nation, but we must address the issue of, like my brother said, where does this money go to? Because you can tax everyone. We can pass the finance bill and we tax everything. But if this money is not accounted for, up to now we don't know what amount of debts is owed. So I think for me that
transparency is very important.
Very important, yes.
Right. Now that is Kevin Osido and Asha Bashir. Thank you so much for your time. And let's get to this. Now, the bottom line is the 2023 finance bill has been met with huge opposition. It is not that people do not understand, they do. They're just concerned it will be prudent that instead of shoving it down our throats, you listen to the people, address their concerns, and show them why it matters and why they should support it. We get you have a budget to fund, but at what expense? The people of Kenya just need to be convinced why they should pay more, and they are open to conversations. When 74 out of 84 say no, it must mean something. We understand you have the majority in the House, hence the talk of it will pass as it is. But have you thought that maybe on this one, the majority will be the Kenyans themselves? The bottom line is, do not just focus on the majority in the House, also look at the majority on the ground. That is the bottom line tonight. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Brian Amwai. Let's do this again next time. Do have yourselves a lovely night. Okay, shukran.